So we're back with hour 2 of lesson 10 in programming fundamentals, and we've been talking a little bit about input validation. So we're going to try this out. So what I want to do is take our assignment 1, our grade calculator, where a user had to enter 6 grades, and we calculated out a letter grade as well as an overall average. We want to add some input validation to that application. So you have 2 choices. If you have kind of a complete version, working version of assignment 1, your own version, you can work with that. You can open up that solution. If you don't have a copy of your assignment 1, or you didn't do it, or your assignment's only partly complete, I've put my copy up on Blackboard inside the lesson 10 folder. So if you need my working copy, you can go in, into the, it's week 11. You can go in and you can download, it's a zip copy of my assignment 1. So you can work with mine. If you've got your own copy, even better, work with your own code rather than mine. This is here kind of as a backup if you don't have assignment 1. So I'll grab my project. So it shouldn't take long to download and extract, and then just open up assignment 1. Again, I would encourage you to use your own if you can. That's great if you have one. So if I run my application, my assignment 1, if I put in, make sure I load form 1 to start. So if I put in valid numbers here, everything should work fine. So there's our grade calculator. The problem is it's really easy to break this. If I simply take out one number, it crashes because it's trying to take that text value and my code is trying to convert it to an integer. Well, if that value is blank, then we get this error that our string was not in a correct format, unhandled exception. So we'll see the word exception a lot. An exception is, it's not exactly the same thing as an error, but it's pretty similar to an error. So when you see that word exception, it means something didn't work right in our program, and we say it's unhandled because our code isn't doing anything. The program's actually crashed. We haven't anticipated and told the application what to do if an error happens. So if I'd installed this program on an end user's computer, well, it's suddenly going to stop working and they're not going to know what to do.
Could we put like an if statement saying if it is like a character is not a number to handle it?
So that's exactly what we need to do. Rather than automatically taking the text inputs and trying to convert them to numbers, we need to attempt to convert them to numbers instead and handle the possibility that one of those values might not be a number. So the other thing we should do, let's just look for a minute, is we might want to add onto our form some kind of message. We could do it, we can either put actually what I'm going to do is I can put individual labels here. Now I could create one label at the top to display any error messages, or we could just put individual labels beside each input so that we could display a message in there if any one input is invalid. We could put a message right beside that box telling the user. So what I'm going to do to add these labels, I'm just going to copy these. I'm going to hold down my shift key. I'm going to copy highlight all 6 of my current labels. And I'll just copy them, and then I'll paste them. Now I'm going to drag them over here. And what we'll do, well, pardon? I'm going to give each one of them a unique name. And then I'm going to change the text on the label. So there's a few ways we could do this. We could either delete the text on all the labels, and if we have an error, we can print a message on the specific label. Or we could set the text property to be something like must enter a number for all of them, but we could make all of them invisible. And then if we get an error beside any one of the inputs, we could change the visibility of that label from false to true. Either way would work. I think maybe I'll do it the second way just so we can actually see the labels. So I'll click on my first label here. First thing I need to do is give it a descriptive name. So I'll maybe call this LBL error 1030 because it's going to show an error message for our COMP1030 course. And I'm going to set 2 other properties here. I'll make my property sheet bigger for now. So I'll give it a descriptive name. I think I'm going to change the color. What would be a better color for displaying error messages? Yeah, probably red is good, or some kind of red. I'll choose this one, fire brick. So if you just click on for color, we could change the color. And I'll keep scrolling down. I'll change the text. So instead of saying COMP1030, I'll say it must be numeric. And I'll change my visible property to false. So here, if I just click under visible, we're going to make this label invisible. So when our form loads, the user won't actually see that label. We'll only show that label if the TXT COMP1030 value is not a number. Okay, so again, we've set 4 properties. The name, which is descriptive. We change the for color. We change the text property. And we change the visible property. So I want to do the same thing with my other 5 labels. Give them each a descriptive name that includes the course code. And then we'll set the same other 3 properties the same. So we can actually do this more efficiently if I click on each one of the other 5 and hold the shift key so they're all highlighted. I can't set the name property because the name has to be unique. But the color, the text, and the visible, I can actually set this for all 5 all at once. So I'll click on for color and go to my web palette and choose this fire brick red. They all turn red. I'll change the text property. Must be numeric. And I'll change the visible property from true to false. So all 5 of these are now invisible. Sorry, all 6 of them are invisible. Run, we won't see any of these labels yet. Right? They don't show up because we've changed the visible property from true to false. So go ahead and make these changes in your application. Now I have to click on each label individually and give each one a unique name. So this one is LBL error 1030. My second one Call it LBL error 1002. Error 1051. We'll just go ahead and give unique names to each of the labels. So now we're going to need to change the code on our calculate button before we try and run any grade calculations. We need to check that each input is numeric. Is everybody okay with setting up the error labels? So let's go into our code here. So we're going to have to modify this code because right now this assumes we've always gotten a valid number in each case. So what we want to do, C# contains a method that will allow us to try to convert something to a number, but it will give us back a true or false. It'll tell us whether that conversion was successful or not, and it won't generate an error if the user either left that field blank or typed in, let's say, a letter instead of a number. So I'm going to copy that section and paste it, and then I'm going to comment out my original code. And the easy way to do this in Visual Studio, if I highlight these lines, this little button on the toolbar says comment out the selected lines. So now all that code turns green, it's all inactive.
Could you use the asterisk?
Yep, I could. You could use, or you could do this. If I undo that, you could just do it this way. That works too. Either one. So this is comment, and that's remove comments. Guess I need this back. Ryan?
Commenting out, is that only for learning purposes, or would you do this in the real world?
No, I would do this in the real world all the time. Okay. So oftentimes, let's say I wrote a whole bunch of code and it's crashing somewhere along the way, and I don't know where. One of the ways, typically, one of our debugging strategies is comment most of it out, run the first few commands, and see if it still gives me an error. If I don't get an error, let's say after the first 3 lines, let's say I got 20 lines of code. So I've comment out the bottom 17 lines. After the first 3 lines, everything's still working. I then uncomment maybe the next 3 lines, run it again. And this would help me figure out where my code's going wrong.
And also, you could always, like I did for the test, you could always take the question and put it in the comments. So if you have a requirement for, like, a certain thing, you can put it in so you have a visual reminder.
We might also use comments on a big block. Let's say I have a working application and I'm adding something new, or I'm making a big change, but I'm not finished yet. So I've only written part of the code, and my incomplete code will cause my application not to compile and run. I don't want to remove it. Like, let's say I'm done working, I have no more time to work on it. I want to keep my code in there so I can come back to it, but I don't want it to be active because it's not finished or not complete. I could comment it out, make some notes to myself what's going on, and then I can come back to it tomorrow. And I can keep my application running without it. Or we put in code that's, let's say, just for testing purposes. So one of the things is, like, let's say I'm building something to email out newsletters. When I'm testing it, I don't want to actually email out, send emails. So I have the code in, but I disable the send email function temporarily while I'm working. And then when I put my code live, I re-enable it. I take the comments out. So it's something we do all the time. So these functions, they've got to come out. So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to first declare all our variables as integers. You could do it on multiple lines. It's more efficient because they're all integers. We'll take out all of the convert commands. We won't use convert. We're going to use something else. So we'll declare all the variables first. They're all going to be empty to start. They have no value. In our original version, we were declaring them and filling them right away. But we know that won't work if somebody doesn't give us a number in every box. So now, one at a time, we're going to try to fill each variable from the box, but we're also going to check whether the text input value is a valid number, valid integer or not. And Max, as you suggested, we're going to use an if. So our integer 32 class in C# has a method we can call, which we see here. Which method do you think we want to execute that will tell us if a certain value is a number? Yeah, that's right, Ernest. We want to, rather than parse, we're going to call try parse, because it might work, it might not. Parse and convert really mean the same thing. Okay? So we're going to try to convert. What value do we want to try to convert for our COMP1030 variable?
Text, comma.
Yeah, so we're going to try to convert txt 1030.text. So whatever the user's typed in that box, try and convert it into a number. It might work, it might not. So this try parse function, if I mouse over it, so it takes two parameters in. The first parameter is a string. So we're passing in the value from our first text box. What does our method return? It says BOOL. What does that mean? Right, so our method, when we try to parse this value as a number, it's going to return true or false. So if we can successfully convert that to a number, will we get true or false? Does true mean success or failure? True success. So that means the user did actually type in a number, and we can convert that to an integer.
But you can always like root for failure, but put like an exclamation point, which means opposite.
Yes. So try parse, whoops, takes two input parameters. It returns true or false. The first parameter is a string. And the second one, which Visual Studio says, is the integer. So what value used to store this number? Yeah, our COMP1030 integer variable. So if our conversion is successful, put the value into our COMP1030 variable. And it uses the word out, meaning that's what it's sending out. So it's called an output parameter. Now we could say if this equals true, we don't need to. The equals equals true is kind of implied. But just to make it clear, I'll keep that in. Actually, what we should do, sorry, is the opposite. If it's false, we try to convert that value to a number and store the number in here. If our function fails, what should we do? So this means we've tried to convert this string to a number and store it here, but try-parse said, no, that didn't work. What should happen? So the user typed in ABC. Well, we already have that. So what should we do with this label? Our LBL error 1030. Yeah, let's change the visible property from false to true so that label shows up. So in this case, LBL error 1030 dot visible. We got an error in this case. The user didn't give us a number, a value that we could successfully convert to a number. So I'll put in a comment. So try to convert the first input to a number. So try parse will give us true if it works and false if it fails. We now need to do the exact same code with our other 5 inputs and other 5 variables. We want to call try parse on each one.
When would you do the try parse as a method and actually just use the text?
We could, although we would have to pass in the text value, the text value, the label, the output parameter and visible. But yes, Max, we could. So we'll repeat this for the other 5 values. We have to check each one individually. We'll just do the same thing. We'll try to convert our second text value and store it in our second variable. If that fails, we'll make our second label visible. Now, probably before I try this for the next 4, we should maybe test this out. Let's run it and just make sure our code is accurate before we repeat it 4 more times. I'm just going to play my application. Oh, we haven't provided values for these yet, so it's going to crash. Okay, here's what I'll do. I'm just going to comment this code out for a minute. So Ryan, here's an example, right? I don't want to write more. I want to test what I've done so far. But the code below now doesn't work with the changes we've made. So I'm going to temporarily comment all that out. So it will just calculate a grade for those 2. So now I can run it. If I put in proper numbers, right, it still gives me my grades. If I leave out my first one, now my try parse check is running, and in fact, I forgot we already had labels here. I guess we didn't even really need error labels. We could have changed the text and the message on our grade labels instead. If I put a number back in.
Yeah, you could change it to be red.
Yeah. Let me run that one more time. What happens if I put in A, B?
It's still false.
Sorry?
Your if statement will activate the code. Yet, if visible equals false, it'll be true.
Oh, yes, my visible should be true. Right. Okay, so it is catching the invalid inputs. That's what we wanted it to do. But yes, I had false here, and that should be true. Make the label visible. The other thing is, you'll notice there's one other little logic problem. So here I type in A, put in a valid number here, tells me must be numeric. Once I change this, my label still says must be numeric. So what should we do every time we click the calculate button? What should we do with all of our error labels?
Make visible new false.
Yeah, let's hide them all again before our check runs. As soon as we click the button, we should hide all the labels because we want to start validating all over again. Because now it's showing me that visible properties, that label's staying visible, even though I have a proper number in there now. So maybe this should be the very first thing we do is hide all the error labels. Well, I want to do this with all 6, Raj.
Like, can we use only one label? If we enter the numeric value, it only shows the value. If it doesn't, then
Yeah, there's basically 2 approaches to input validation. One is we put a message beside every input. That's wrong. The other thing is we just have one label, maybe at the top or at the bottom of our form, where we append on and we list all of the errors. Both work. The one challenge with putting it all in one place is this. Let's go back to let's look here, for example, at the Globe and Mail's register form.
can I show you something on my laptop?
Sure, where did we go before? Hang on.
Register.
I thought I went to register, but now I get this instead. The problem is sometimes the register forms are big. So if you print all the validation at the top, right, where is the user gone to submit the form? Where's the submit button usually? At the bottom. So they scroll down to the bottom. We can take them back to the top and show the message, but maybe some of the fields they've missed our way. Like if the form's long, it's hard to read the message and see the inputs at the same time. So it works, but we have to be careful.
Can I show you something?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Like, you don't print using real marks.
Okay, so you've done it like on the key press.
Yeah, and if we go over under,
Yep.
everything is in the same label.
Okay, so we
That's what I
can,
was-
yeah, we can use the same label and we can do it on the key press as well. Doesn't have to validate when we submit. And that's one of the nice things about like the HTML5 validators. If you add a required attribute, as soon as a user goes in that box and leaves it, if they don't type in text, it automatically shows the message right away. They don't have to submit the form. So I'm going to make all of my error labels invisible. So that should get rid of the problem once the label shows up. If I fix my input and submit again, that label shouldn't stay visible. So it says must be numeric, but now if I put in a valid number and submit, that first one goes away each time. As soon as I click the button, all my labels are hidden. And we run our validation check again. So we always want to start by making those invisible. So our try parse method seems to be working. So we want to execute it 4 more times for the other 4 we have.
Shouldn't you put the other statement that calls upon the method as else in that statement, because it still writes the large pattern in those statements, and you don't have a grade of.
Yes, we're going to get to that. Not only do we not want to write the letters, but we also don't want to perform the calculations if we have any invalid input. So yes, we're going to need a check. We don't want to calculate an average and try to do an overall grade unless we have 6 valid grades. So we're going to need to do another check before that. You're right. So now we're going to check our other. So we need to check all 6. We'll need to run that try parse command 6 times. So obviously using HTML5, if our interface on the web, that saves us time because we can just add type equals number, and then we don't have to write this code on our application. HTML5 will help us. HTML5's actually not been around all that long though. For many years when I started building web applications, we would have to write all the code for every single field because there was no such thing as HTML5 validation. It's actually fairly new. So I'll copy those 3 and change those to my other course codes. And this one's COM. And our last one is our Gen Ed course 1005. So now we can validate, and now Ryan, I'm going to uncomment the rest of my code. So now we can check all 6 inputs and we can show an error message if any one of them is not valid. We'll just try this out. If I leave the whole form blank, I should get all 6 labels showing up. Okay, well, obviously something didn't work quite right. My COMP1030. Because this is the problem with copying and pasting. I forgot to change this one. This is my label 1016. Pretty easy to miss an instance. This is often how I know if one student's copied another student's code. Because they don't copy over all of the instances. I had this happen last week. One student built an application that was supposed to say songs, and another student built an application that was supposed to say places. And when I was marking the student's application that said places, it said songs in several places in the file. And I said to them, how come your application says songs when someone else's does? Well, they didn't have a very good explanation for that. So is it possible you looked at someone else's code and copied and pasted and missed some of the spots? Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So I'll try it again, make sure all the validation's right. Okay. So we're getting all our labels showing up. However, you notice it's still trying to calculate our grades. And it shows 0 and F. We probably don't want to even attempt to do our calculation unless all of our inputs are valid. So how could we do this? How could we make it so that if the user has any input errors, we don't carry on So there's no point doing any of this, Well, I guess we could set the individual grades if we want to. So we could set an individual grade if we get a grade in that course. We could still show the letter grade. But overall, there's no point trying to calculate the average unless we have 6 valid numbers. So we'll want to move this code around. And then we'll need to make a decision here. Can we calculate the average, yes or no? So how could we decide whether or not to calculate the average? So there's 2 possibilities. We have 6 numeric inputs, or we don't have all 6 numeric inputs. How could we do this without a great big long if statement, without putting all of these try parse functions and making sure every one of them is equal to true? We could do it that way if try parse this is true and try parse this is true and try parse. That's not very efficient. Anybody think of an easier way for us to handle that? I'll give you a hint. We can add one more variable into our code here, and that variable could tell us whether or not our form is complete or incomplete. What type of variable could we use to do that? Yeah, we could use a simple true-false variable to keep track of, have there been any errors made in our form, yes or no? And if there are no errors, well, then we'll go ahead and do this. Otherwise, we just do nothing because our error labels will already show up. So let's go up here. Maybe before we do a validation, so let's create true-false variable. Tell us form is complete or not. What could we call the variable? Let's give it a descriptive name. What should we call it? So it will hold the value of true if the user's put in 6 numbers. It'll hold the value of false if they've given us anything else, even 5 numbers and 1 empty, or 5 numbers and 1 string. Could be. Here's a nice simple name. We'll create a Boolean variable. Why don't we call it form OK? That's what we're doing. Let's give it an initial value. Originally, should we set it to true or false?
False. Because you start off with the number.
Well, we start off, have we found any errors yet before we check? Do we have errors?
Not yet.
No, so we can maybe give it a value of true. But to start out, we'll say we've got no problems. We'll assume our form is okay. So now we go and we check the first box. If the first input is not a number, what should we do with our OK variables? Our form still okay?
No,
No, so let's change the value to, Preet? Right, let's change the value. Right? So if any one of these is not a valid number, we're changing our variable from true to false. Our form was okay, now it's not. So what should we do with our other 5 input checks?
The exact same thing.
Exact same thing. In any case, if any one of those conditions happens, then our form, oh good. So we'll just repeat that same command 5 times. So once we're done checking, now we have an indicator whether our form is complete and we can run the calculations, or whether we should just stop because we've displayed a bunch of error labels, 1 or more error labels. Maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 6. So how can we use this value now down here? So we only want to do our calculation of our overall grade if we have all 6, right? Because our calculation is looking for 6 values, and we'll divide by 6. If we don't have 6 numbers, we don't want to execute this.
Do we also put it?
Yeah, okay. So if just one tech max. Okay, so Ramandeep, what do you think the if statement could look like? If, yeah, if what value is true? Right, if form okay equals, right? We're comparing. Is form okay the same as true? And I'll open a curly brace there, and I'll just drag the closing curly brace down here. So we're only going to try to calculate the average if we have 6 numbers. We started out saying our form was valid, and we never found any errors. So form okay never got changed from true to false. If our form is still okay at the end, now we can go ahead and calculate.
Should we actually put the if statement above the set grade?
We'll come to that in just a sec. We'll come back. First, we'll deal with this. It's a good point you raised, Max. Let's see first if this part works. So let's try it and see. And I realize we're almost due for a break. Okay. So if I put in all the valid numbers, to calculate, because my form is okay, because all the values successfully were parsed as integers. As soon as I make one of them not, we don't want to calculate the average anymore. Actually, I better stop and restart it because I don't think I cleared out those labels. We probably should. But now if I put in some numbers, even one letter, we don't bother calculating the average, because when this happens, COMP1051, try parse fails, it returns a false label. And in this case, when this code executes, the next thing that happens is our form's not okay anymore. So now when we get down to here, this block of code, it won't run because okay is set to false. So if I just run this with my debugger on for a minute, actually we'll put it here. We'll try again. So when I submit, try parse in this case, so my text property is A. So try parse is false. So this error label becomes visible, and my form okay, which was true, is now false. So when we get down here and evaluate, Form OK is false. So these 3 lines are going to get skipped, right? Code jumps down here and it ends. And our calculation never runs. So yes, Max, you're right. The next thing is we probably shouldn't even be trying to call set grade on any course where we didn't get a number. So if try parse fails, there's no point in calling set grade on COMP1051. We can call it on the other 5 because I put in numbers on my other 5, but not in this one. So I'll just stop that. Delete my breakpoint. So I would suggest we want to move these 6 commands around a little bit. So where would it make sense, for example, setting the grade for COMP1030? So just take a minute and then we'll take a break. We'll maybe just finish it. Where could we put this command? So it runs if we have a valid number in TXT COMP1030.
You can always put an else statement on the if statement with a if, and then else on the call.
Right. So we're going to try to convert it to a number. If it's not a number, we're making this error visible and our form's okay. Here we could put in an else and we could move that set grade command for COMP1030 in here. Right? Makes sense? Because we got a valid number in that case. So I'll take this line and wrap it here. Things happens after we check COMP1030. We show the error and we say our form's no good. Or if we got a valid number, we can then set the grade for that particular course. We want to do the same exact thing and move those other 5 commands into an else condition. So I'll type else inside each of these. And then I'll just drag and drop those 5 commands into the right place. Oops. Putting them in the wrong place, which isn't good. So each time, as soon as we check the input, if there's no error, we'll call set grade for that particular grade, and we'll display the letter grade. So now if I put in 5 numbers in one string, I should have 5 letter grades beside the numbers, and then must be a number label error message. So our red label shows up and no grade there, and our overall calculation won't work. Doesn't run until we put in a valid number. Yes, it's quite a bit of code.
Do all that in a method.
Yeah, we could. A little more efficient. with the method, 3 parameters. String in the output, the number, it would return a number. So we could do it that way. We could make it a bit more efficient with the method. But the long way for now so we can see exactly what we're doing one field at a time.
So what's the arrays?
We'll come to that after. So this is the kind of check in your assignment. You won't need to do it on the drop downs because the drop downs are limited. The user can't choose anything but cheese, vegetable, and meat. You have to validate the drop down choices, but we're going to have 3 quantity boxes. Yep.
What if someone does box in the stack box?
Is if you just type those choices into the items, it defaults to the first one. Oh no, it doesn't. Okay, so sorry. Yes, in that case, you will need to validate the drop-down choice as well. So you need to validate the drop-down choice as well as that the quantity is numeric of each one. Okay. So try parse is how we can check number. Check if it's true or false. Does anybody have questions about aid here in terms of checking? Okay, let's stay back at 10:15. We're going to start looking at arrays, and I'll probably go into next week's lesson as well. Preet, I'll be right with you.